Welcome to Community Strategy, Designing for Place, Purpose, and Profitability. And this series is generously sponsored by our host, KI, and I'm really honored to invite Deb Brunig from KI to join us and to give us some welcome and talk a little bit about this program. Doing this virtually is very different for us, Deb, isn't it?
That it is. Thank you, Cheryl. Nice to see you this evening.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Did we ever think when we started this journey in 2019? It seems long ago. And for everyone out there, thank you for joining us this evening. KI, we're so honored to sponsor this event. And to give you a little background, as Cheryl and I talk about the journey, it started in 2019, and KI, we're very honored to have this conversation and have it facilitated and really led by Cheryl and the team and the panelists. It was a venture that started in 2019, took the conversation to 6 cities in the United States, learned a lot about community, had maybe a little different meaning, but there was a common thread that came through that at the end. We learned a lot in those 6 cities. IIDA developed a wonderful executive summary that's available if anyone is interested in what we heard in 2019. It was so great that we decided let's expand it in 2020. Little did we know that expansion would include doing this virtually. So we're taking this to 8 cities in 2020. Chicago is our event here this evening. So again, we want to thank everyone for joining us and really looking at, I think now more than ever, the topic of community is so relevant and timely. We need people, we need that essence of community. We miss one another. We wish we could be doing this live in IIDA headquarters as we did last year. But the good news is we're resilient, are we not? And the ability to adjust, I think, is really what brings us here this evening. So on that note, I'm going to toss it back over to you, Cheryl.
All right.
And kick this evening off. So again, thank you everyone for joining your commute with us this evening, wherever you are.
Thank you, Deb. And before I introduce our wonderful panelists for this evening, because this program is about community, we want to have a bit of audience participation. The panelists want to see your faces. We all want to see your faces. So you should be receiving an invitation from our tech team. And with that invitation, we want you to start your video and join us all on screen, and we'll do some quick hellos. And that includes the IIDA headquarters team as well, who typically try to stay behind the scenes, but we want to see everybody's faces. All right. Oh, here come people. Yay. There's Wendy, there's Shay.
Okay.
Hanson.
There's Hanson. There he is. Hey, Bob. Beth Ann outside. Love it.
Perfect.
I know Anson's got a bottle of bourbon underneath his desk.
Oh, well, there you go.
I hope he does.
Jasmine. Hey, Andrew. Come on, Tracy. There's Kimberly. Hey, lady, how are you?
Good.
A lot of faces we haven't seen in a while. Excellent. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It's nice to see, there's Tracy. It's nice to see faces. It's nice to make eye contact. Everybody looks good too. I know everybody's probably wearing sweatpants from the waist down, but from the waist up. Awesome. Well, we are going to, it's just nice to be able to have this moment since this is a program about community. There you are, Fior. Since this is a program about community, and we're going to be having a conversation about community. It's really nice to see everyone's faces, and thank you for joining us. And we are going to ask you to join us back on stage, but we are going to get started with the program. So let's get you guys go back to your seats, grab your popcorn, grab a snack, and we'll get started. All right, let's get our panelists back. All right, we'll just switch modes through the wonder of Zoom. Perfect. And our panelists this evening joining us, Ann Gibson with Gensler, Jennifer Lady, who is with Walgreens, and I just had that crazy moment where my screen just did something crazy. Stephanie Peters, also with Walgreens, and Mandy Tavonen, who is with Relish Works. So welcome to each of the panelists. And let's do a little bit of housekeeping. Do we have some CEU housekeeping or no? Oops, there it is. I knew we had some CEU housekeeping there. For those of you who need CEU credit, this program is registered for 1 hour. We report your credit to IDCEC. If you could please not engage in any black market CEU credit exchanging and share the class code. We will issue your certificate of completion once the program has concluded. And if you don't have a unique IDCEC number, it will be provided with the certificate of completion following this evening's program. All right. That's our kind of required housekeeping. And I think we are ready to we're ready to jump in. As Deb said, this conversation about community, pre-COVID, before COVID, BC, we talked about both designers and clients and how community is created and how community can be both emotional and physical. And it is something that as human beings, we intrinsically crave community. We're social beings, we're social animals, and we need that moment of being surrounded by others and emotionally attaching to others. But community is not like Crystal Light, right? It's not a just add water proposition. Community requires many things, and we often can't have a conversation about community without talking about brand and culture. And let's start there, and how the role of brand and culture and the role that they play in design, and how we establish or talk about or define or illustrate brand and culture. And I think one thing that is so critical for designers as strategists, so many clients will ask you to help them interpret their culture. And that's such an interesting kind of proposition, because it's almost like your clients are asking you, tell me who I am. Can you help me figure out who I am? Anne, can I ask you to talk a bit about brand and culture?
Yeah, absolutely. And Cheryl, thanks so much and IIDA, thanks for having me. It's brand and culture are things that we've been talking to our clients about for years, decades, and it's often how how our clients differentiate themselves in the market, but also in their physical space, and drawing top talent to an organization has really been driven by sort of that brand, and kind of aligning individuals to culture and to the mission and purpose of organizations. And I think this is something that, we've been at Gensler, we've been working to use different tools, and whether that's through physical space or virtual tools, or different ways, to connect employees and staff to organizations through brand and culture. And I think, what's interesting in where we are right now, and we've been talking to a lot of our clients about, well, what does that mean moving forward? What is the significance of brand and culture and community in the built environment if we're not there? And so, that's what we've been hearing from our clients, is that is probably the most paramount thing to consider at this point, is really how, we all know, there's no real reason to go back to the office necessarily. And we're doing it, maybe not as seamlessly as we would like to be or would hope to be, but we're making it work. And so the things that are going to draw people back to the office are going to be different, and it's going to be around that emotional connection and that human connection and the ability to really have relationships and build relationships beyond the black box. And so as we think about physical space and how we, help organizations attract that top talent in the future, I think it's going to be really around kind of rallying around this idea of community and purpose, and attracting people with similar passions and goals.
Yeah. And given that we're all living now, instead of some of us living and working remotely, this desire for community, what do you think people are going to attach to in this moment where we are living and working via Microsoft Teams or Zoom or whatever the platform is, when we can't attach to physical space? What do we attach to?
I mean, from what I've been seeing and experiencing in my own work life, and seeing this happen with my clients too, is that, people we're craving this attachment to each other. And so, the way that I've been getting teams to attach and connect is through nonprofit work and volunteerism, and really kind of taking passions of individuals and then sort of channeling that in a way, that allows people to get together but distantly, and sort of give back and contribute to our communities right now that are so desperately in need in so many ways that are just almost beyond comprehension. And so having sort of little moments for people to connect in ways that they feel that they are able to contribute and give something back, I think is a really powerful, although it seems really small, but I think once you sort of get a general mass of people kind of in that mindset, I think that's what helps kind of draw people back together.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. Jen and Stephanie, Walgreens has almost become synonymous with community. There's a kind of community that's built around your brand. There's the community of people who work at Walgreens. There are a community of customers and consumers. Obviously, people gather around purpose. But in the work that you two do at Walgreens and leading your team, how do you talk about community, and how does Walgreens help support community goals? Jen, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Most recently, in order to kind of, because like you said, Walgreens is out in the communities all over. And we're the corner pharmacy, right on every corner in America. So right there in those communities. And so then how do we reflect that in our corporate offices so that we feel that we are there, working there, are part of those communities all over. And one most recent thing that Walgreens did is moved into 1 million square feet in the old post office space in Chicago. And so we were tasked with how do we make that massive space feel like it's part of the community, make team members, make it feel like cohesive space. And actually in that very first slide that we were showing, part of how we made that massive space feel cohesive, and it's 1 million square feet and it's on 3 levels. And it's kind of like a split level house where the majority of the space is all on 1 floor, and then the rest of it is split onto 2 other half floors. And how do we bring that all together? And how do we provide a space with 1,600 employees that are there, space for them to be able to gather and have a central space? So what we're looking at here in this first slide is a space that we call the forum. We created this forum space here. This that we're looking at here, that's part kitchen and part gathering, part meeting space. But what you see is that sunburst of lighting, and that kind of represents the team of Walgreens, and the spokes then are our spokes that go out into the different communities. You can follow the spokes from the main entrance of their space back into the sunbeam. It kind of pulls you back into this space. This is that community space then there. What this space also does, as you'd see in the next slide, is provides a space for people to gather and people to meet and to have these larger events. So this connects the space, the stairwell connects the main level with the upper and the lower level as well, and also creates that gathering meeting space for events to bring everybody together, connect the space. That's there. This other space, something that we also did within this large space, is broken up into different neighborhoods that represent the communities in Chicago. Each one of those communities has its own beacon. We call these respite impromptu meeting areas beacons. This is the beacon for, help me out here, Stephanie. Oh, this is Fulton Market.
I think it's Fulton Market.
This is the Fulton Market beacon, a space that you could get away from your regular workstation, come together with the rest of your teams that are in that neighborhood community. That also links to the outside communities that we're in. So it gives that feeling of each one of our neighborhoods has the feeling of the neighborhood that it represents.
And so
and we'll talk about it in a second,
Stephanie.
But I was gonna say, we'll talk about it a little bit more, but each of those neighborhoods really we really did do a lot of work to try and tie each of those communities back to the actual communities, whether it was geographically or with art representations or kind of the look and feel. But it was really important to us to really capture our surroundings, given that this was a really big move for us to get into the post office. We really wanted to embrace the city and make it feel like our home within that space. And it was important that we bring the outside community in to do that.
And so teams from Deerfield, other locations, obviously, were coming into downtown for in the space, right? And so teams, potentially people who had never worked together before?
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there were teams from an older Chicago space that we had that we were moving in, and teams from Deerfield that had not worked together at all before. Right.
And how do you internally talk about being part of a team? How do you reinforce teamwork?
That is a great question. And I think it's something that has changed a lot over, I would say, the last 6 months. I think we used to consider teamwork, what group you sat with, what neighborhood you sat with. I think teamwork is a lot more around the functional areas that people have now, more so than it used to be. It's It's not about who you're sitting next to. It's not about, you know, the person you roll up to anymore. It's really about the actual function. And so we have a lot of cross-departmental work that's really happening across Walgreens right now. COVID has been one of those spark points for our organization where I've never seen the organization work together like this before. It has been amazing to see teams kind of just pull people from various areas and just build these really collaborative teams, because this is work we've never had to do before. And you need all those subject matter experts to kind of get everything together. And so right now for us, team is really about whoever can get the work done, and however we can get it done fastest. I think it's less about, you know, who's my leader, what's my department, what's my level. It's really about who can work together, who can do it efficiently, who can do it effectively, and how can we get it done for our stores and the neighborhoods that we serve. Because between COVID and, you know, community unrest and the racial justice movement, we have really been reaching into our communities in different ways than we've ever done before. It is it's a real different time for Walgreens right now.
And there was for a couple of years, you talked about from a brand statement standpoint that Walgreens was at the corner of happy and healthy. You're at this amazing nexus of retail and healthcare, and I'll add in social justice. I mean, what you've been doing around social justice and social responsibility, because you are in the neighborhoods in Chicago, and you know, at that moment with protests and sometimes with looting, people in some neighborhoods were not able to get to their local Walgreens to pick up their prescriptions. And I heard amazing stories about how you had employees who were delivering prescriptions to local residents. They were living your brand.
Yep. It wasn't just delivering. It was really the reverse as well. We had, I think, dozens and dozens of stores in the city that were looted back in May, but also over the last few days. And what's really interesting is those communities where they really desperately need our services, when our stores got looted and were down, the first people to come and help us were the neighbors. We had neighbors picking up garbage cans and trying to pick up, you know, debris and help us reopen our stores, because there is a recognition that not only do we serve them, we are a needed utility in their neighborhood. And so even when we couldn't get out to deliveries, we can get our mobile pharmacies up and running within 24 hours. So we had trailers out there in the parking lot. You know, we were making sure that regardless of what was going on, we had a duty to our customers, to our patients, that they needed our services. And that was something that was really vital for us. You know, it's a really empowering moment to be with an organization like this when you see kind of the interlinking between the community and the organization.
Yeah, that's incredibly powerful.
And funny, if I chime in, sorry, Cheryl.
No, that's why I was
on the same topic. I've found, because I'm in the food business essentially, and that the sense of community at the moment in time when the restaurants are shutting down, and primarily that's who we're serving, the thing that's bringing us together. I think that's where the question started. What does community really mean at this moment in time? And it's like a rallying cry to make sure people have food. Our distribution, our supply chains have been so disrupted that it's pretty easy when your mission is so mission critical. So like our mission is food, and everybody needs food to survive. And however we can, we had our big semi trucks out in the middle of communities and we had to repack all this food from, big bulk 50-pound bags of rice to smaller, to make sure that people who were unable to get food could get food. And I just think, much like what Stephanie's saying, the teams, the way our internal community gathered around that was around something external, not around something internal. It was really around that kind of like mission critical, get food, work together however you can. There are no titles or roles, official roles or titles or responsibilities anymore. It's kind of like who's in, go. So I think there's something about that kind of mission has turned into mission critical.
That's such a great point, Mandy. And it's, people are seeing a need and filling it immediately, sometimes asking permission later. It feels like the strategy around community has increasingly become, let's rally together to do the right thing, because need is so readily apparent. How, I'd love to ask you and Anne, from a design standpoint, from a strategy standpoint, how have you worked directly with your clients to support their community as strategy goals? Has there been a moment where a client has ever deliberately and intentionally asked you to help with community goals, or do you sometimes have to suss that out? And that feels like a so pre-March question, like pre-COVID question, but do those community needs also, the second part of that question is, do you think they vary by discipline? Does hospitality think about community differently than retail or healthcare or workplace? So I'd love to kind of get your insight on how you've directly worked with clients to support their community goals, and then if those goals vary by discipline. Anne, do you want to start?
Well, yeah, I was wondering if Mandy and I could actually talk about a project that we worked on together
Oh, I'd love that.
a few years ago,
Yeah.
actually for Walgreens. And so I'm going a little bit out of order here with the slides, but I think it kind of fits in well with what we're talking about. And so this is like way back pre-COVID. This is like in 2014. But Mandy and I were working with Walgreens around kind of redefining what their community pharmacy could be. So at the time, Walgreens had recently acquired this prescription delivery organization that would serve prescriptions to patients who had chronic illnesses and sort of conditions that they were living with as sort of a lifelong kind of issue. And so the pharmacy for those types of patients needed to be something really different than the corner of Happy and Healthy pharmacy, where you go to, pick up your, you might pick up your over-the-counter medicine and your hairspray. This is like a completely different type of pharmacy. And so Mandy actually led this like really great strategic process around, engaging with those customers and really also engaging and understanding the people who worked there and how they were so different from the pharmacists who worked in, say, your Walgreens pharmacy that's embedded within Northwestern Memorial Hospital. And so, I don't know, Mandy, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I think it was interesting that Walgreens was so eager to hear from the pharmacy leaders because each of these specialty pharmacies had it wasn't the only disease state, but one pharmacy was maybe focused more on cancer patients. So a lot of their drugs were, these are like drugs that are $24,000 a week or some crazy amount of money just to get these cancer drugs. And so the relationship that the pharmacists had with the patients, who may or may not be proximate to each other, was so deep because they were in a lifelong relationship. The terminal illness or the sustained, chronic illness was going to be there for as long as that person was going to live.
Yeah.
And so the relationship that they had with the pharmacist, as Anne was saying, was just so different than the traditional pharmacy. And so we were able to talk with the pharmacy leaders. They even connected us to some of their patients. So we also, one of the specialty pharmacy was geared around HIV, primarily served an HIV population. And we were able to talk with patients about the meaning of their relationship with their pharmacist and just really understand, like, it wasn't what the pharmacy meant was the pharmacist and the team there, and being able to have these like special private spaces for consultation and conversation. But also, like, so each of these pharmacies needed to be different from, some of them had a high percentage of prescriptions that were shipped out, but some of them had a high percentage that were delivered or administered right in the location. And so Anne and her team had to really think about each of these kind of these pharmacies were community centers in some ways. So I think it was a really great way that we were able to engage the team that worked there, even the patients who visited there.
The physical space, when it becomes emblematic of the relationship, it almost interprets the relation. We know it supports and reinforces, but it almost interprets the relationship as well. Anne, did you want to jump in with anything?
Yeah, I
else?
was just going to add to that too, that like, you know, it was about the relationship of the sort of the pharmacist or the provider to the patient or customer, but just as important was the relationship of the coworkers and the people that worked there. And so, you know, for some of these community pharmacies, like they didn't look like a pharmacy at all, and there were no, you know, screens or walls or rows and shelves of medications. It was more of like a lounge area, and the staff were not intended to be wearing lab coats. Like it was really more about how do you just like create a more personal one-on-one relationship, and create a space that then communicates that that's the expectation here. Like when you come here to work in this pharmacy, the expectation is that you're going to build relationships with people. And so it's open and more comfortable and more casual, and flexible too. So yeah, it was really, really fun to work on that.
Stephanie and Jen, what the kind of direction that Mandy and Anne were going in, it really is that transformation from space to place. And right, we know that space is a physical construct, but place is emotional, right? It's when we talk about a sense of place or feeling our place. And I'd love for the two of you to talk a little bit about why place is so critical and important to Walgreens as an organization and as a brand. And, you know, do you talk about strategy in relation to place? Anne was invoking that support and reinforcement of that relationship that a pharmacist has with a patient, with a client. It's medical, but it's also incredibly personal. So I'd love for you to talk about kind of the components that take us from space to place.
Yeah. Can I start this?
Start us off? Yeah, please. Yeah, please start.
This is actually, so this is a great question. This is a great slide. This is my, when I was talking earlier about kind of some of the artwork and things we did to make this go from space to place. This is the specific piece of art I was talking about. This is one of the things we did in each of those four kind of neighborhoods is we had an artist from each of those Chicago neighborhoods come into our space and do a mural or some form of art and bring that physical neighborhood concept into our space. And so this one was done by an artist named Centrock. He has done amazing work in the city over the last few months, specifically since the murder of George Floyd, and he's done all kinds of amazing work with the racial justice movement. But this is one piece that he did specifically for us. And if you look in the background, you can see kind of there's a Walgreens store and it's a pharmacia because he's from the Pilsen neighborhood. And it's very emblematic of his artwork and his style, but he brought it into our space and we really gave very limited we gave very, wide parameters in terms of what we wanted from these artists, because what we wanted was for them to bring themselves and their neighborhoods into our space so that we could embrace them. And so the beacon itself in this neighborhood is, I don't know if this is actually the beacon for Pilsen, but the artwork is for Pilsen. And so on all of the areas there, it is. So this is one of the really important things that we did. And I don't know if we have other slides that show more of the artwork or the beacons, but yeah, so there's a few more. I think that is Bronzeville. Again, it's the outside coming into the space. It was really important for us. And it really did help us feel, like we weren't just a suburban company moving into the big city, because I think there was a real fear of that. I think we didn't want to just transplant our people. I think we really wanted to take that space and make it our place and make our place within the city. Walgreens started in 1901 in the city of Chicago. We have our roots there. We intended, I think, to make sure that we embrace that as a whole. And so that's what a lot of the artwork and the furniture and the design really say and bring to that. It was one of those things that was, I think it was vital for us.
Well, I think it's really important now too, especially with where we're at with, still we have a vast majority of our team members working from home.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be really important then, even now more than ever, to talk about how do we, bringing them back into the workplace. What is that? It's that sense of community and sense of place, right? It's more than, you need it to be more than just a workplace. It needs to have that feeling to it that you want to be there as well. And I mean, and be able to connect with others. It's all of that, and that's what we want, but now more than ever.
Yeah, that's going to be
and
an
like everyone
interesting
else,
moment. Yeah, go ahead, Stephanie.
And like everyone else, we are struggling. I'm gonna be really honest. We are at the moment where we're trying to figure out what everyone wants to come back for. I want to come back because I can't work, 100% effectively with my kids in the background. They're great, but they also make a lot of noise. And so I like going to the office 2 to 3 days a week. And there are other people like me who have the ability to kind of get that childcare and go back to their normal pace a little bit. It is a world of difference, even for me now. I think when I walk into a meeting room, when I have a meeting with 3 other people in a room that used to hold 20 people, that now holds 3 or 4 people. It may not be normal and it may not feel right quite yet, but it is also really effective sometimes just to have that in-person meeting. And I think I appreciate that now much more than I did before. The number of times I walked out of a meeting, I said, well, that could have been an email. Well, honestly, now I realize that there are meetings that still need to happen, and I do appreciate some of them a little bit more. And so I think, that connection, that in-person, being able to see people's faces, understand, what their body language is telling you, some of that stuff is what we're really going back for, because I know now I can do a Zoom happy hour with the best of them. But sometimes I just want to sit in a room with some people.
It's interesting, Stephanie. I think there will be a certain amount of relearning how to be in the workplace. It's almost like when astronauts come back from space, there's the re-entry period. We all are going to need to deal with re-entry and reorientation to transition from the way that we're working, or working in our dining room and working with kids and dogs. We've seen kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly. With Zoom, we've had this window into lives that we may not have had prior to COVID. It makes me wonder what attitude and behavior is going to be like when people are back kind of on site. Will they formal up again? Will there be a shift in attitude and behavior?
I can tell you, so I actually have been a little bit on campus at Walgreens this entire time. My team also manages the facilities and operations. Okay. So our team is also getting people back to work. So we've been responsible for temperature checks and, sanitation stations and all of that good stuff that gets people back in the space. And I can tell you that the things that you see in the real world are the things you see in the office. It's people who are not so keen on following some of the rules. It's people who are really keen on telling you that other people aren't following the rules. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of, campuses and workplaces are microcosms of the general population. But one of the things that I will say is that having been on campus the whole time and now welcoming other people back with open arms, because I miss everyone so much, is that I've had to kind of turn my empathy up a little bit, because I forget that I haven't been home this whole time. Most other people have been really isolated and at home and doing things differently. And so for me, it's really about making sure I recognize that this is not normal for everybody else anymore. Mm-hmm. I've been doing this for almost 6 months. Everybody else has not been having their temperature scanned or wiping down workstations or, spraying hand sanitizer every 4 feet. And so it's helping people adjust is also been really a big part of what we're doing right now. And it's a change management I did never anticipate us working through.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. That's really interesting stuff. Let's talk a little bit about when when community is being created, who are the stakeholders? Who's affected indirectly by, we've talked about how folks are directly affected by community. What about people who are indirectly affected by development or design or architecture? One of the conversations that happens obviously in cities like Chicago, how urban communities have been adversely affected through displacement and gentrification. How can we as a design community, how can designers and architects and developers engage the public a bit earlier so that this attachment to community is more prevalent? How can we align the goals of an organization? How can we help an organization align goals with a community that it's resident in? Anne, I'm going to turn to you with this one.
Okay. Well, I think, one of the opportunities that we had was, and this speaks to your question about Cheryl, I think was designing a space for Columbia College. And, Columbia College has been an urban campus, a very vertical campus spread out around the Loop and South Loop area in Chicago. And they came to us or actually there was a competition and they were looking for a student center and a centralized space for their students to feel like they belong, because honestly, the students didn't have a home base really. They would go to classrooms in various schools or various buildings kind of around the neighborhood. And it was really spread out. And so, they just, and that was really just a fact of like over time, the school kind of taking over real estate as they could without a real kind of strategic master plan at the time. And so this building here was designed to intentionally kind of like turn itself inside out, really. And the architectural designer on the project, Scott Hurst, did these really beautiful, like super simple diagrams of just like peeling this thing inside out. And the idea was to really take all the activity and put it around the perimeter and create this really glassy front that was incredibly porous with the street, to really bring the students into the space and bring the city into the space. And really, the building was designed obviously for the students, but it was created through a series of workshops and charrettes with the students, with the faculty, to really understand what it is that they needed to have this place that they could call their own, really, and have this sort of community space that they could also transform and grow and sort of make their own as well. So it's intentionally kind of, rough and unfinished. And there are simple features like this platform under the stair that students, theater students will use for performance rehearsals. There are all sorts of really cool amenities in here, like soundproof music rooms and recording studios and things that are really available for the students and also for the community. So I think, this kind of engagement with students and that community to really kind of define the program and define what it is that they need is something that we try to do on every single project. And I think that the community can vary in terms of, if it's an internal community or an external community. We're currently working with the YWCA and have done their office space. And as a result of that work with them, we did a pro bono project at Emmett Till Elementary down on the south side to create a peace room and a community space for parents, as well as renovating their gymnasium in collaboration with NBA. And all of that was done in collaborations with parents and community members around that school. So I don't know if this exactly answers your question, Cheryl, but I think I just wanted to sort of, reiterate the importance of like really engaging a broader group of people to understand what the needs are and not come in with preconceived ideas.
Right. Yeah. Or a definitive mandate.
Right.
Mandy, the notion of hyperlocality, being hyperlocal, is incredibly important, but sometimes that hyperlocality, you don't want it to invade a community, right? So what is your conversation around stakeholders?
Yeah, I guess I would just, I mean, it's kind of similar to what Anne said, and I think there's another thing which is kind of like expanding the definition of design to include the design of the services, the design of the program, and not like the number of rooms and square feet per rooms kind of program, but like what kind of programming and stuff is that, what kind of activity is really happening there. And so like really thinking about like the traditional kind of lens of design and kind of blowing it up and saying, what else is happening here? And almost also like not just what is the site. And I know that this is like a tip, like I'm not an architect or interior designer. So I don't exactly know the process, but I recognize that people are taking into consideration the context and the neighborhood and all of that. But I think there's like a context and a neighborhood that we don't see. And it's just kind of like, it's just expanding our view of all of the design that has to go into it, from like in this case, experiences. What are we trying to get people, what kind of emotions are we getting that wanting them to feel, and how can we imagine kind of all of the users? So I'm working right now with a healthcare institution in Grand Rapids and in Detroit to design a medically tailored meals program. And it's based on particular disease states. And so each community has a disease state that they've decided places a lot of burden on the community, not on just the hospital, but the families of the patients. And then it causes the family members to call in sick to their jobs. And then it like perpetuates a lot of community kind of angst, and it's a real detriment to the community, these chronic disease states. So, in doing that, we're not just engaging the patients who will be using the meal program, or in one case, it's the cardiologist who will have the initial conversation with the patients, the cardiologist, but we're actually talking to the families of the patients to understand the burden and kind of the trickle-down effect of all of this. And then all of this has to take place in spaces too, right? So where do you first have the dialogue about the meal program, and what is the digital space where the cardiologist is interacting with the patient in an ongoing way after they've left the physical space, after there's been a discharge? How do we make sure that this patient is still engaging in this meal program, and how do we keep track? And then how do we factor in all these other things like loneliness or any social anxiety that people are having, especially in these COVID times? So it's like, it's really kind of blowing up two things, which is like design, and then users of the design has like really expanded beyond that initial, like if you just keep asking like who else,
Yeah.
pretty soon you're like, oh, but wait, then the patient's daughter has to go to work, and then her employer, and then you start to imagine all of that stuff. And if you start to just think about, it doesn't have to be statistically relevant, the number of people you interact with. It has to be enough until you hear the same thing a couple of times to inform the design of a new solution. And so it's kind of like the engagement is, oftentimes I used to find especially that clients would say, well, how many interviews? Or how many of these stakeholders are you going to interview? And that would be how you'd scope a project. But now it's kind of like, well, I'm going to keep asking questions until I feel like I've heard the right thing. And you don't really ever know how much that is until you start pulling on a few threads. And so I just think like kind of having the space and room from clients who are interested to like, again, expand the notion of design and expand the notion of the users. The exact number of stakeholders or types will evolve over the course of the project.
Mandy,
Right, it's not a single static group. Yeah.
I love where you're going with that, Mandy. And I'm working with a health system to sort of create a new type of healthcare facility on the East Coast that is an ambulatory surgery center, basically place where you can go get same-day surgeries and also visit your primary care doc and also maybe, get an x-ray or an MRI while you're there. But putting them into communities and the challenge has been, how do you take this sort of prototype kind of idea and replicate it to some degree so that it's cost effective to build, but also so that it connects with the communities that are different that it's going to be going into. And this idea of sort of relationship driven care is what has kind of come up as like, it's not about patient first. It's not about community only. It's about relationships between patients and communities and patients and caregivers to community and system to patient and like all these, different complex web of relationships. And like, just like you're saying, like you never know where one story is going to lead. And all of a sudden we found ourselves talking to people about long distance relationships and how they make them work. Like that has anything to do with going to, get your knee scoped.
But I think it does. And especially when you add in this like virtual world and combine it with the physical world and the ways in which they rely on each other, it's just like, there is so much work to be done to better understand that other relationship between like the physical, digital, and human. I don't like, there's something there too to try and
No, I think the pandemic has caused us to rethink the interconnectedness of human beings, and stakeholders feels like such a old school word. I like what you were saying, Mandy, when you were saying who else, then who else. That's the very definition of stakeholders. And whether it's that relationship between healthcare providers and caregivers, family, there were I think elements that weren't talked about or discussed or regarded as with as much import as they are now. I think we're realizing that we are all kind of responsible. I'll, go on a little bit of a soapbox. I'm not just responsible for my health. I'm responsible for your health too.
Yeah, that is that's a huge kind of thing to undertake right now, is to like recognize in the environments that we go into, the responsibility we carry when we enter a physical space now. It's just so great.
Well, Stephanie, I loved what you were saying about like different people's reactions to coming back to work. And I think, sort of uncovering those fears and like being, aware or open to and more empathic to people's fears. I think that's also something that we need to get our minds around too, and like understand that nobody's coming from the same position, although we've all been in this weird thing together. And so the commonality of like, we've all had to deal with something really, really, really hard, and then help each other kind of get through it, because we're going to have to rely on each other to kind of figure this out again. And maybe there will never be a receptionist again. Maybe there will be like a giant trough of hand washing sinks or something when you walk into the office, or like a mud room to take your shoes off and put on your inside shoes.
Right.
I like that idea, Anne. Outside shoes are dirty. I like that idea.
Yeah. My kids did that in Montessori school. There was something to it.
I'm a Montessori kid. That's why I like it.
Yep.
There you go. There you go. Something, yeah, some simple concepts that maybe we took for granted are the ones that will ultimately save our lives going forward. You all have touched a bit on wellness and well-being, and particularly social responsibility. They're all so interconnected when we're talking about community. I would love to maybe Jen and Stephanie, maybe let's talk about social responsibility. Obviously, it's a major platform for your organization, for Walgreens, but how do you see social responsibility, wellness, and well-being kind of converging and influencing designing for community? Jen?
Yeah, so we can talk about this a little bit. One of the things I think Jennifer and I, or Jennifer specifically worked on, I think, is this concept of, we have this outdoor garden space now at Walgreens corporate. It's called Myrtle's Garden. Myrtle is the wife. Jennifer, fix my story because I can't remember.
Yeah, I believe it is Charles Senior's wife, who did have her own, and she actually had a garden at their home, and that's where this came to be. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we took a dirt patch it was literally a dirt patch in a courtyard, and we developed this outdoor space
for a long time, and not used for a long time.
And even now, so it's really interesting. We've really tried to bring outside in a lot of spaces right now. There's a green wall. We've been experimenting with a lot of moss walls. Most of them are not living. They're kind of the kind that live through the humidity in the air, apparently. I say apparently because we either don't have enough humidity or something has gone awry on a couple of them. We have some dark patches in a few, so we may need to adjust some levels. But we are really working on making sure we bring the outside in, making sure greenery is an aspect. We're also, as a campus, working towards a zero waste facility. So Walgreens was not always zero waste. It wasn't built into our design, but we are now trying to build that into our design of our campus. So we're developing all kinds of different solutions, but I think the goal is to have the Deerfield campus be zero waste in the next 3 to 4 years, which is a really big deal for us. I think, especially an organization that has not always leaned in, and from our corporate facility, at least, to all of those types of things. I think it's made a big difference for us. You know, things as simple as removing desk side trash cans has been a really big deal for us. Team members hate it, to be perfectly honest. They hate it. They don't want to get up. They don't want to walk to a garbage can. But if you take away trash cans, people tend to develop and create less trash. They recycle more because you have the recycling and the garbage right next to each other. We've introduced composting on our support campus for the first time. We may be, you know, it's obviously not the newest, most exciting thing, but composting is important. And on a campus that produces as much food waste as we do, it's a really important thing to have. You know, organizations like us are all doing kind of the best we can in terms of environmental impact. But, you know, Walgreens is also taking a really big stance right now in terms of community impact and making sure that we're being good community partners, making sure that we are caring for the communities that we're a part of. And that will continue to be our goal. We have brought into our campus, I know a lot of downtown organizations have this, but we now have bees on our campus, which is really fun. That's a really cool CSR thing. Our facilities director actually is the person who approved it, also happens to be highly allergic to bees.
Wow. But
he was so on board with the concept that he decided he would, you know, just grab an extra EpiPen and introduce it. We've been told they don't sting much, so that's kind of the other side. You know, Walgreens is really just doing as much as we can, I think, in terms of social responsibility. In terms of wellness, I think, you know, we are doing our best to keep everyone healthy and safe on our corporate campuses, like I mentioned before. We've got sanitation, we've got extra cleaning. We're following all of the appropriate CDC guidelines to the T, really, and doing them in real rapid transformation. I think we switched our cleaning protocols and things like that much quicker, I thought, much quicker than I even thought we could. So I think wellness is really top of mind. One of the big things for us as COVID kind of kicked in was We don't have a fitness center anymore. People are concerned about coming into the clinic we have on campus. So how do we make those things accessible and make sure people feel safe coming into those? And so we've adjusted protocols and made sure those things are still accessible for people, because we are Walgreens. We do need to have those things accessible for people because they rely on them. We have 7,000 people on our campus, and a lot of them use our clinic as their primary care, because we have primary care physicians on campus. And so making sure those things will all continue to be made accessible and safe it was really top of mind as we start getting people back to work.
Yeah, that I love that you use the word continuing. Continuity is going to be so important. Those things that were strategically important to Walgreens pre-COVID will continue to be important to Walgreens. You might talk about them differently or deploy them differently, putting health and safety at the forefront. And I think that's a really important point to make, that, even though things have changed so dramatically for us personally and for organizations, we still will find a way to prioritize what endures as important for companies and organizations. And obviously wellness and well-being and active design will continue to be priorities for Walgreens. It's such a hallmark of who you are as an organization. It's a hallmark of your teams and your staff. That to be able to continue those conversations will be really critical. Yep. Did you want to jump in, Jen? I'm sorry, I didn't want to cut you off. Okay. I'm watching our time too. Let me really quickly, there's this grassroots effect around community, and Mandy, we know that behaviorists and neuroscientists tell us that in spaces that are that command our attention, that resonate with us as human beings, spaces that allow us to feel a part of something larger. What are those sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle things that support building community, that kind of happen in a space, that kind of reach out to human beings and attract us and hold our attention?
Right. I mean, I think, there are some pretty basic things when I think about like my first community that I interact with every day is my house, right? And like, what are the things that make me feel part of this house? Are the people that are in it? Do I have shared values? Do I have a shared sense of purpose? Do we have a sense of belonging here? And and then I think that translates to our other spaces. Like I notice with my team, it's this rallying cry. And sometimes the rallying cry is really purposeful and really positive, like now. And sometimes, and it's evident because we have things that in our space that indicate that we're working on problems in the food system.
Mm-hmm.
So like we have visual cues that indicate that is what we are in fact doing, murals and books and everything, all of the artifacts and all of the rituals we have are around our purpose. So it's like what happens in the space. So we have lunch. It's our free twice a week thing that we do. And like, even when I was cutting my budget during these COVID times, I was like, when we go back, I can't cut the lunch. It's so critical to communicate that we are a food company.
Mm-hmm.
The books, anything that we have has something to do with food. And so I think it's like there are the visual cues, but then it is this shared rallying cry. And sometimes it's like what we don't want to happen. Sometimes it's a competitor, right? We're like, we're going to beat that person or we're going to win. And in our office, we call that no offense to anyone named Sally, but we call it our Aunt Sally. We say, oh, who's our Aunt Sally right now? And it means the person we're gonna win against. So it's either something we're working towards or something we're working against. And I think, the space can do a lot to communicate kind of what those shared values are, what your mission is, what your purpose is, how you have a sense of belonging. Even if you're doing different things and tasks, there are reasons to come together. And I think we've done, an okay job of trying to remind people in the virtual times what our sense of purpose is. Like next week, we're sending everyone a meal, and we're going to do a shared meal so that we can like remember. I mean, we're only, by the way, the innovation team's only 25 people.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
so like I don't want the Walgreens, you have like, 20,000 people.
I'm feeling that for my next team meeting.
Yeah.
So.
Yes. So we're having a chef come and talk to us about food.
Oh, I love that.
And then
That's
we
great.
have this sense of purpose now to highlight, Black-owned restaurants. And so it's, we're like weaving in all these layers of purpose and meaning about the things that matter to us now, and trying to create kind of virtual spaces where these same types of things can happen.
That's fantastic. And you used a really important word. It's one of my favorite words, ritual. And, we all had to develop a ritual. The people who adapted quickly to working from home realized that they needed kind of structure and ritual around that. And, sometimes it's formal, but sometimes it's informal. But ritual is so tied to purpose and to strategy and to community. We require it. And that, I love the fact that you're weaving in what is now and what's relevant, and having a deliberate and intentional conversation about Black-owned restaurants, right? That absolutely resonates with the moment that we're in as a society.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the rituals kind of stayed the same in some ways. We were able to recreate them in these ways, or in this time, in new ways. And then we added some new ones. So like we have these anti-Zoom meetings where everybody's kind of like sick of looking at squares until we go on a walk. And so everybody's out and you hear horns and dogs and everything, but that everybody's like moving. And you're like, we're trying these new things that give us a sense of like, I see you. I know how hard it is to be living at work. Because like, that's actually what we're all doing now. And it's not easy. And so maintaining some of the fun and some of the rituals without adding another Zoom meeting is a really tricky balance that, I haven't resolved, but it's really difficult.
And again, I want to pick up on something you just said, that notion of letting people know that they're seen. That's so critical, again, especially now, to just say, I see you, I'm going to support you. That acknowledgement of another human being, particularly when we're, doing it virtually, is probably now more important than ever before. And it extends itself to the conversation around inclusion and equity. To be able to say, I see you, is just, it's so important.
Especially with the mental health issues that are like on the rise during this time. And I have team members who have anxiety, depression, things like that are, and me, myself, I'm a hypochondriac, so this hasn't been easy. But I have like really had to pay attention to people's faces on Zoom to think like, are you okay? And then if I get a sense that someone's not, I'm like on the horn, like, what do you need? How are we going to like give you the space you need? Because it's really, being in the physical proximity with people, when people are able to go back to the office, being able to like feel the vibes someone is giving is like so critical to understanding your tribe at work. And we can't really do that.
Yeah. Let's I want to give the audience, that was great, Mandy. Thank you for that. I've got lots of questions rolling around in my head now, but I want to give the audience a chance to ask some questions. We're going to invite you back on screen, everybody back on screen, and to share some questions. Our tech team is going to do a little bit of magic right now. So if you've got questions, if you can share them via the chat or the Q&A box, and then we're going to get everybody's faces back up, I think. Let's flip the attendees back to panelists. That takes just a few seconds of Zoom magic. And we've gotten a number of questions that came in actually prior to the program. And Mark Hirons wanted us to ask, can you identify the most impactful community engagement that you've had with clients? And how do you measure long-term success with regard to community engagement? That's open to all the panelists. If you guys want to jump in.
I'm trying to think of the one. And is there something that we worked on probably that had like because I've been my head's been in a different space for a few years. It's like,
and even if you can't think of a specific one, the second part of Mark's question was, how do you measure success? How do you know community engagement has been successful?
Well, I'm thinking about this medically tailored meals program that I'm working on and designing, and it's not just, again, I know it's not as physically space kind of oriented, but it's really easy because there are very specific metrics. Are people eating the meals that they are being prescribed? Are they have their readmission rates lowered?
Mm-hmm.
Has their cost of healthcare lowered? Has their blood pressure lowered? Like there's a really like hard and fast kind of rules around it. I think it gets a little bit different when we imagine, space. Like if we could imagine these pharmacies that Ann and I worked on, like coming to fruition in the way we had imagined, what would we have liked to have seen? I think it would have been, it's not like it's not like the goal of it was get more prescriptions filled through this pharmacy. It was continue to serve these patients with like the loving care that we want to. It was like, how do you measure that? I don't exactly know, but like, did the space facilitate it? I think there are ways in which you could start to imagine kind of like, was it successful? And I know Gensler has like kind of indexes and I forget what they're called.
I mean, we like measure and score everything.
Yeah.
And, we recently, pre-COVID had done all this research on experiences and how what makes a good experience and how people connect more with a brand or an organization or a space. And there was this whole framework that we came up with around people's intentions need to align with their expectations, need to align with, what they are experiencing or receiving. And all of it sort of got wrapped up into sort of like overarchingly kind of getting to what people's intentions were and how well a space delivered on those intentions. I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but I'll try to tie it back. So, what we identified, we created this framework that there are sort of 5 different modes of intention. And I'm not going to remember all of them right now, but there's like task mode, which is like, I'm here to go get my prescription. There's discovery mode where like, I'm maybe wandering down the aisles and, I found, realized I really need some of that mousse. There's, and then there's this aspirational mode where, you're connecting to a higher purpose of an organization. And what we found is that if you don't deliver on task, everything else fails. So like, you got to get the task right first. If you can connect to one or more of those other intentions or modes, then that makes the experience sort of stickier and more connected. And so what we try to do is to deliver on experiences that can hit on multiple different intentions. And I think in terms of measuring that, I think we always try to look at design as not a final solution. It's sort of like a step in the prototype, basically. And so I guess I would say that success could be measured as, are people engaged, and are they engaged enough that they want to change it? And so you can change it together, and then people have more ownership, and they have more desire to really see it succeed, and their needs are being met in a way that allows them to be more connected to that space.
Yeah.
From a client standpoint, I would say that the success of the designer, it's a little different for us because we do have our own internal design team as well. But for us, the success for us is really team member satisfaction that we measure on a regular basis through surveys and other engagement measures. But it's also about, leadership engagement and leadership satisfaction. So to be perfectly honest, if we design something and everyone in leadership loves it, but the team members hate it, it's not really a success. It's a checked box, and that's it. Because that ultimately it's going to fail. Because our leaders, as much as they want something very specific, if it doesn't work for the team members on campus or the people who have to use it on a regular basis, they're going to eventually realize that it's not the right solution. And so for us, it's really about team member satisfaction and function. Like Ann said, if the task isn't fulfilled, then it doesn't work. The rest of it falls apart. If my temperature scanners don't work in our new process for getting in the door, nobody cares about anything else. They're annoyed that the temperature scanners didn't work. And it's all downhill from there.
Yeah, it stops right there. That's perfect. Any questions from the audience? We've got you guys on screen now. Anybody have a question for the panel? I'm not seeing any hands raised. All right. Well, apparently the panel was so freaking amazing and awesome. They answered all of your questions. Let me just, with the couple of minutes we have left, if you think of a question, put it in the chat. But let me just ask each of the panelists, be predictive. What's next for community? What is next in as we kind of live through this moment of resiliency and preparedness, as we contemplate coming back to a physical workplace or continuing to work remotely? The world is going to be incredibly different and attitudes will be different. What's next for community? What's going to matter? What's going to endure? What's going to change? Can I start with you, Stephanie, just because you're on the upper left-hand corner of my screen right now? So can I start with you?
Yeah, so I don't know if you remember this. Last year we asked this question, and I said we would all be in the office on headsets and microphones and videos, and everyone thought it was ridiculous. And look where we are now.
Yep.
So but honestly, the next thing I think is going to be really important for community is really safety. I think that's going to continue to be top of mind for the next however long. And people feeling safe and secure is really going to be key for any kind of community effort. I don't think people will even be ready to talk about community and team and togetherness until they feel comfortable.
Until they feel comfortable.
And so that's really going to be top of mind as we go forward. And I think any organization and any design group that continues to keep those things top of mind is really going to kind of be on the right foot. Because to be honest, we talked about this the other day, even once we have a vaccine and things like that, we're less concerned about COVID. Do we want to take away the temperature screeners? Or do we say, maybe there are a lot of people that are continuing to come to work sick. Maybe we can prevent another outbreak like this if we do have them stay there. It's not something we would have ever thought of before, but now that we're looking at things like saying, don't come to work if you have a temperature over 100, Why would we change that now after we have a vaccine?
Right.
You know, if we've already got the infrastructure. So things
Right.
like that, I think, are just going to continue to be top of mind for us.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you for that. Mandy, be predictive.
Well,
What's next?
I guess what I think one thing I keep talking to my team about is I'm scared both that things won't go back to normal and that nothing will change at the same time. And that we are in this really exciting moment in time, if we can see it that way, where there is so much energy around things being different, and nobody has a shared view of what different is exactly. I would say that's probably more divided than ever. But I think that when I think about like the choices that people will make in the future, if we take advantage of like this window of opportunity, this grace period, then I think like people will make choices about the communities they participate in around this like shared ethics. Where I see it happening in restaurants now, because again, that's my customer. People are making choices about the restaurants they go to. It used to be like, do I know where their food is coming from? And now it's like, do I know how they're treating their employees? And do I know what their hiring practices are? And the more we know, the more informed choices we're going to have. And I just think I think as we like come out or come through continuously,
That works.
as we're in this, we are going to have just all of these opportunities to make more informed choices about the communities we participate in.
Asking more questions and better questions and different questions than we were asking before.
Yes.
Yeah, I love that.
I hope so.
Yeah, thank you. Jen?
Yeah, along with the safety bill, I think we're going to continue to see people continue to work from home for quite some time now that people realize it can be done.
Yeah.
Where before, some leaders maybe didn't see that it could happen. They can see now that it can.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be continuing to find new ways to connect then as we continue to be more virtual. Some people will want to connect in person, but I've found, like from what Stephanie says, without that safety, some people won't. And now that the leaders realize that you don't have to, is how can we continue to find those new ways to connect virtually then too?
Yeah.
Without.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you for that. And Anne?
I would say that our communities are just like, this sounds silly to say, but like they're going to be different. And they're different because of this moment that we're in, and because of the different people that we're working with. And I say that like in terms of like, my teams have changed and we've shifted and moved around and we've connected with new people in different ways. And so like that has caused my community to change. And then also, with all that's going on and so many people's desires to do something, like even if it's the wrong thing, they just want to do something, or if they say the wrong thing, they would just want to be part of it, and so I have found like new communities sort of popping up of diverse groups of people that wouldn't otherwise have connected. And so I think, this is and I hope we don't lose that, like I hope that isn't just like of the moment right now. Like I hope this is more of a launch pad to continue to think differently, and that leads to inclusivity, and it leads to diversity, and it leads to change and innovation and growth and all of that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Anne, and thank you to each of the panelists. This has been a great conversation. And for the audience, before I turn over to Deb to give us some closing thoughts, I want to thank each of you all for the privilege of your time. This is a program that was, after hours. We didn't provide cocktails. Hopefully you had a cocktail at home on your own. And because normally we have a cocktail hour before and a cocktail hour after, but I hope you were enlivened and enjoyed the conversation. It really felt like we were a community here, and it was nice to see your faces. And Deb, again, thank you to KI for hosting this conversation. It was so meaningful and so relevant, and obviously just great to see everyone. But for each of you in the audience, the privilege of letting us come into your home and have this conversation, I want to thank you for your time. And Deb?
Great. Thank you, Cheryl. And with that, I again, thank you to our panelists. What an enlightening conversation. We can't applaud, but I'm going to say let's applaud by ear. You're all on. Thank you to all of the panelists. Such an enlightening, and IIDA, obviously, for facilitating this. Cheryl, you talked about what endures and ritual. And at this time, I would be inviting everyone up to probably have a cocktail or some great food. But throughout this, you know, we heard Anne talk about how do we give back. Stephanie and Jennifer talked about working together like never before. Mandy, you talked about mission critical, rally, a sense of purpose. So it really, at KI, it really made us look and internalize and saying, some of these events are going to change. And let's look at the positive aspect of it. We may not have cocktails, we may not have hors d'oeuvres right now, but we want to take that, whatever that monies that would have been spent on that I think no one here tonight is in need of food or drink, but we want to take that and shift that to a different purpose. So I'm very honored to say that KI is going to be sponsoring the IIDA Educator Diversity Award. So we're very privileged to have that opportunity. This is an award that recognizes and celebrates an educator who is contributing to the advancement of racial and ethnic diversity in the interior design industry. Such a relevant need right now. So we are, again, thank you IIDA for this opportunity. Thank you for our guests here. And you know, we just look at it that way. How do we look at things in a different manner? So we're really pleased to be able to do that this evening and moving forward for 2020. The conversation will continue. It's virtual as always. So watch for us on social media, IIDA, we're working together on this. It's such a great partnership. And KI team, thank you for being on here today with Chicago. What a great, one of my favorite cities here. And I want to close and I want to thank and recognize Cheryl. Your continued efforts to promote equity and social justice in the world are just an inspiration. It's very evident in your leadership and the messaging that IIDA national and all of your chapters bring to our community. So thank you, Cheryl, and thank you to IIDA.
You're welcome, Deb. Thanks so much. Thank you for all that you're doing to support IIDA, and the Educator Diversity Award is near and dear to our hearts, and thank you for supporting that. And to every single one of you, and to my most excellent IIDA headquarters team, have a good evening, peace, strength, be strong. We'll be in the same room soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.